Herbert, you do various different concerts and albums, you do live workshops, you work for opera, you appear on jazz festivals. But my question is, I mean, now releasing an album more dance orientated, is dance music actually still important in your life?
I think dance music is still important to me because it gave me, first of all, it gave me a way out of where I was, which I was doing classical music, and I lived in a little village in the middle of nowhere, and dance music gave me a voice, I guess. You know, it gave me a place to, you know, in 1996, January 1996, I released 3 records at the same time. One was Herbert, one was Dr. Rocket, one was Wishmountain. And within 6 months I'd been on the cover of 5 magazines and been to sort of 30 countries. And then it's been non-stop ever since then, really. And so I owe a lot to it, really. And it's where I cut my teeth. English phrase.
But do you visit nightclubs for dancing?
No, I don't go to clubs anymore. But that's mainly because I'm in nightclubs at least twice a month, you know, working, DJing, and so I still spend a lot of time there. But no, not so much for pleasure, really. Also, when you're an old fart like me with young children, you know, you don't want to stay up really late because you've still got to get up with the children at 6 o'clock in the morning, and also you need another old fart to come with you, you know. So it's not like being 20 anymore, you know. But also I think I still think that there's a lot of potential in dance music that hasn't really been realised or fulfilled, you know. I think as long as you can keep people moving, then you can really do some strange things with some strange noises. And I just don't think we're there yet, you know. I think we're still quite conservative. We've always got more conservative, I think, really.
We will come to this point, but I wanted to ask, I mean, when you back then went to clubs and maybe also danced, how would you describe your dance moves? Describe my dance moves. Well, it was a kind of a big thing when it started, which was my whole life I'd seen English people dance really badly, and then when I went to my first proper rave, which was in like 1989, something like that. Everybody was dancing really well. Everyone was dancing in time with the beat. And this was so exciting, you know, to suddenly see a room full of people with rhythm, you know. It was like a big deal. I'll never forget it. I can still picture it in my head. Just like, wow, where have all these people been, you know? And so yeah, for me that was a big shift. It was a good shift. I mean, you just said that anyway, although you're maybe not partying, but you're like working twice a month in a club. So when you see the clubs and what's going on in a nightclub, what is different to the time when you started out nearly 20 years ago?
I think the main thing, I think the sound has got a lot better, and I think it's got a lot worse. So the sound systems are obviously really great now, but also the kind of sound that we're listening to through those sound systems is worse, you know. I just hate the sound of Pioneer CDJs, you know. It just makes all music sound horrible, and the CD players that Pioneer make, you still can't beat it needs to be the right sound system, but vinyl on the right sound system, maybe with a Yuri or a Rain mixer, just sounds incredible, you know? And so it doesn't sound as good, but it also sounds better as well in some ways, you know. It sounds much clearer, but we don't always want clear, you know, sometimes you want a bit of crackle and fuzz or something like that. I think there's a lot more corporate presence, like things like Red Bull fridges probably in every bloody nightclub in the world now, and like logos and things like that. I think there's a lot more, I think it's a lot more tolerant actually, like in terms of ethnicity and race and gender and sexuality. Everybody's welcome now in a way, you know. That's not a big deal if you see people who look a bit different in a nightclub. And when I first started going out, that was a big deal, you know, those changes. Very aware of them. So, yeah, and also the drugs change as well. It's something that we don't talk about a lot, but, you know, in the 80s and 90s, everyone was on ecstasy, and now people on all sorts of things, you know. It's a real mixture, everyone's on sort of, and so sometimes you might have some guy right at the front just like, come on, faster, faster, that who wants full-on techno, and then you might have some group of women friends who are out for a nice drink, who just want to have like, who want to dance to some like something with some vocals or something like that. I don't want to make cliches about gender. I don't mean that as comes across as a bit clumsy, but I just mean in terms of, yeah, just different people wanting different things and having different.
But when you say the sound got worse, you also then think about music quality that decreased, or?
I'm not sure it decreased, because I think it's very competent, the music being made now, you know. I think it's very competently made. I definitely don't think of, I always think it's a bit dangerous to get too nostalgic about the past in some ways. I think the good thing was that it was harder to make music back then. It was harder to get your music onto white labels, not onto white labels, onto a proper record label. It was hard to get distribution, it was hard to get heard. And I think that struggle made musicians have to commit more to the act of making music. And spend time around engineers as well, recording engineers, had to borrow equipment and had to, you know, learn the hard way, whereas now, you know, if one of you had a laptop, we could make a finished piece of music in 25 minutes from start to finish, whereas that would have been impossible, you know, a few years ago, you know, when we started. So I don't think that the music itself has necessarily got worse, I just think there's more of it. There's a lot of it, so finding your way through it can be really exhausting, actually.
But when you say, yeah, if you just have a laptop, you can start making music today.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good thing, the so-called democratization of production?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a good thing. The problem that I have with it is that it doesn't seem to have an accompanying philosophy. So I sometimes think that it ends up just being, you're just doing it because you can, and that seems to me like a not very exciting reason to create art, you know? I don't think, I like thinking about, well, why do we need any more music? Why should this piece of music exist? What do we hope to achieve? Or is it just going to be disposable? You know, so much dance music acts like it's just disposable, that it's just here for this week or 2 weeks, and then it doesn't matter, in a few more weeks' time we'll hear something else. So that lack of ambition and that lack of philosophy, I think, is more dangerous than the tools. You know, the tools are fantastic, but I think you have to be really careful about the tools as well, because they're just encouraging you to do things in a certain way. So they encourage, when you load it up, it says 120 BPM, 4/4, it lays it out in blocks, and it's like, how about a drum machine, how about a bass, how about a synthesizer, how about a compressor, how about this equalizer, and it's just laid it all out for you. It's like sitting down at the piano and the piano says to you, hey, G minor, hey, play G minor, okay, now play this, okay, now do this. And that's the whole beauty of the piano, is you just play whatever, it's empty, you know? Whereas the computers nowadays are constantly guiding you in a particular direction.
I have a quote from Gerd Belis, who is like one of the founders of Ableton, a software engineer. So they say when they create this music software, we'd like to help that the musician gets to a point where something is like going, where something comes from the speakers what he likes. So they want to help the musician or the so-called musician to get to this point and as possibly fast. What do you think about this?
I mean, I think Ableton is a really creative software program. I think it's really brilliant, but it still has the same. It still have the same philosophical problem, which is he's saying that he wants to get something that somebody likes. Well, actually, often what that means is people like what sounds familiar or sounds authentic or sounds like they're heroes or sounds like a record. And when you're starting out, that stuff is very seductive. I don't think it's wrong to want that. I just think that it's very seductive to because you can sound very quickly like somebody else, and that is in a way it's encouraging a kind of a replication of a set of ideals, or it's leaving the status quo unchallenged in a way. So, but I don't, personally, I don't think speed is always good. I think that some of the most rewarding projects I've been involved with have involved struggle. Have really involved friction and really trying to work out how to do things. And I still, I've spent a lot of money on my recording studio over the years, and quite obsessively, but I still actually prefer some of the sound of my earlier records that were made with 3 pieces of equipment and 2 cables. There's something about it that I still find appealing more than hundreds of £1,000s worth of equipment that I've got now.
Producing music today and compare it like to 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, because people, when they get older, normally they get a little bit more, what do we say, mild, or I don't know, or something. Did something happen to you, or are you still very serious in the studio about your concepts and theories?
I don't know. I think I would hope that I'm not. I would hope that I'm not more mild. My last record was made out of a bomb exploding, so it's quite difficult listening and quite difficult to work and make that kind of music. I think if anything, I feel more radical now because I'm clear of who I am. I think when you're young, you're very... I remember feeling like I needed to look and act like a DJ or something, even though I was never a DJ, I'd never trained to be a DJ, but suddenly I was getting loads of DJ offers to come to Germany and go on tours with Daft Punk and stuff. And suddenly I felt like, okay, I've got to buy records and I've got to keep up and I've got to be a certain way, and I want people to like everything that I do. Whereas now I don't think that's the case. For me, I'm much more interested in hearing new things, and even if nobody else wants to listen to them, for me, I want to make music out of things that no one's made music out of before. I want to try new things, because I guess, by this point you've just heard so much music, Every time I DJ, I go to, so once or twice a month I go to Beatport or somewhere like that and just listen to the last month's worth of music. Some of it selected by me, some of it just sort of randomly going through. And it's exhausting. It takes me like 2 or 3 hours. I listen to sort of 800 pieces of music and I find 3 pieces that I like. It's just exhausting, after years and years of listening to music, so in some ways it makes me want to be more radical. It makes me want to be like fight against all that stuff, Whereas when you're young, you want to fit in and you want to be liked.
in one essay that I read online, you raised a little bit this questions. Okay, as a musician or artist on borrowed time, what kind of music should we make? And I guess there are a lot of people, especially in electronic and techno music, that would say, "Life's short, let's have fun."
I think that's okay. I mean, music isn't just serious. Music isn't just political in the way that sometimes people describe it as. I think music is a lot of things, and going out can be a lot of things as well. Music can be about going out for a celebration with some friends, or it can be going out about forgetting. You want to forget yourself or forget your problems. And you can imagine that a nightclub, the sort of people that go to a nightclub in Syria, if there was such a thing, and why the reasons they were going would be very different to ones that were going out in America on a Friday night. But life can't just be about escapism, or it can't just be about hedonism, or it can't just be about that stuff. Of course it can be whatever you want it to be, but if you haven't got any food on your table the next day, or you haven't, if you have children and you can't afford to take them to school, or you've not got your shit together to get them a school uniform in time, there's certain things as you get older that are actually important, and that having children really changes your perspective on all sorts of things. And yes, listening to music and going out can be really fun, but I'll tell you what, it's not half as fun as like a small kid jumping on your head at sort of 5:30 in the morning, even though you've had no sleep and all the rest of it,
I'm not so much talking about the listening, also about the production. I mean, because you, for yourself,
okay.
You have your often quoted manifesto. Actually, I have to ask, do you still use it strictly?
I do, really strictly, but not on this record. So I didn't use it on this record. This was my summer off, this is me just taking it easy, So
that was my question, if you are today a little bit more relaxed.
I don't know. I'm an optimist by nature. Like, I think we can make a difference, otherwise I wouldn't be doing music like this. But I think we're really in big trouble, if we don't stop. Volkswagen doesn't stop making cars, and Coca-Cola don't stop making Coca-Cola, billions and billions of cans of it, and if we don't stop eating beef burgers and all the rest of it, then we're screwed, And no matter, all of this is very nice, and it's nice to be here, and I'm very lucky to be here talking to you about my music, but actually it's just decoration, really, it's just, and so, life isn't and shouldn't just be serious and heavy, but we've got big issues, we've got really big problems,
So now you do a kind of more relaxed album in between, where you don't strictly follow your rules, and afterwards again back to the serious stuff?
Yeah, sorry. Next time it's going to be weird again, but that's what I feel like I have to do. I feel like I've been given an opportunity to work with sounds that other musicians in the past, I've never had that opportunity, so I feel like I have a responsibility to make the most of that opportunity, even if it means doing stuff that I would rather not do, or rather something else,
Does it mean that also this album is more entertainment than others?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure I like that entertainment word. I don't know. Maybe it is. That's for you to decide, I think. It's probably for you to decide than me. But entertainment. I mean, there's maybe one or two tracks that could be considered entertainment, but the themes are still serious, even if the music's lighter.
But why don't you like entertainment?
Because it feels like like a distraction from what's really going on, and it feels like part of the same system that's causing all the problems. So I don't think that it's enough for us just to consume things. I don't think that's a very efficient use of the world's resources, just doing stuff. You know, that's not, I don't think that feels good enough. And it's a bit like, you know, you remember, you read about things like the Mayan civilization or the Aztecs, and you read about them, how they were this incredible civilization, they had all these resources and things like that, or the Romans, and you know, they had everything, and then it just collapsed, and you just think, how is it possible that they could be from going on sort of top of the world to just collapse in a very short period of time normally? And we're just in that position, you know. We're just in one of those moments whereby we've built a system that can't sustain itself and is going to collapse. It's not a question of, all it is a question of when. Of course it will collapse, it will stop. We won't be living like this in 100 years' time. So how are we going to manage that transition, you know? Are we just going to pretend it's not a problem? Or are we going to try and do something about it?
But why then you don't change jobs, become a politician or a scientist, because you still believe that you can change something through your music to help the situation?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. I think one of the reasons I still do music is because I don't think there's many people doing directly politically engaged music, at least not with sound, maybe with lyrics, but not with sound. And therefore I feel there's millions of politicians, and you know, there's a lot of people doing that stuff, and actually, you know, if I believe those things, then music is, why not music, you know?
But can you name a situation where you really felt or really noticed an effect of your political concepts inside your albums? For example, I don't know, that some person comes to you and said, hey, this album made me think or changed my life. What happens? Just one example.
Just one example, I did an album called The Mechanics of Destruction about things that I didn't like hyper-consumer American version of capitalism coming into Europe. So it had tracks made out of Gap, Coca-Cola, Starbucks, things like that, Disney. And I did a show at Sonar where I did the live show that accompanied it, and someone came up to me a year later and said, I saw that show and I resigned my job at Disney that after the very next morning. So that's one example, you know. There's a lot of times where people come up and say this changed or this. Now I'm not saying that I'm a one-man sort of tidal wave of political change. I'm definitely not saying that, but it's a very different. I think it's really important to put it into perspective. So, what about newspaper articles? You think how many newspaper articles are printed? Can you point to a specific moment of change that a newspaper article? You know, you might have read a really brilliant book about the Rwandan genocide, but has that changed anything? You know, okay, it might have changed your consciousness, and I think that that's an important and valuable thing. And so part of working in music in this way is to do that. But can you say that helped people in Rwanda, the fact that you know a bit more about what happened, you know? So I think we have to be very careful about what we expect of things. And I think the other really important thing to say as well is that when we're talking here about political music or political actions, really we're talking about left-wing political actions. And actually there's a whole series of right-wing music. So you think about mainstream R&B and hip-hop now, people like 50 Cent, and the messages are use violence against your enemies, look at heterosexual women in a certain way, look at homosexuality in a certain way, make as much money as possible, use violence against your enemies, you know, think of yourself as a brand and as a business. These are the same messages as the Republican Party. You know, these are right-wing agendas, and they're the messages that we're constantly putting out there. And
the other thing as well, like George Orwell says, if you choose to not make your music political, if you choose not to make your art political, then that's a political decision itself. So if you look at a lot of music, you look at a lot of pop music and see that it's not trying to change anything, whether it be form or the content. I think it's reasonable to assume that they're happy with the status quo. And Naomi Klein, in her new book about climate change, talks about the only thing that we have to do to destroy our planet, the only thing we have to do is keep everything the way it is, So actually that's a profoundly political act to not do anything, and that's very dangerous. We're in a very dangerous position. So just making a political statement about something on the left or how things are organised, that's not the only form of politics available or that's going on.
This album, we listened to the church organ. Yeah, we have 2 or 3 questions to go. We listened to a church organ, which reminded me of the topic of religion, which was so far not so present in your work. Or did I leave something out? Pontificate is a song that I saw on a recent album, yes.
What's that, sorry? What did you say?
Pontificate.
Oh, Pontificate, that was about the Catholic Church, I think, in a way, there's sort of like a generational album, really. There's something about my children in there. It's my grandfather's piano on there. My grandfather used to play the organ in 7 different churches at one time. And there's something about the organ that's always associated with change, a birth, a death, a christening, or a family occasion. It's about a kind of a turning point, or about a remembrance, or something like that. And I really, it feels really radical in a way, like in that last track, to have a church organ with a 909, Of course it's not really radical, it's not radical at all, it doesn't fucking change anything. But there's something about it that suddenly feels like, oh wait a minute, this feels like a funny combination somehow. And so I feel like it's a kind of, yes, we associate it with religiousness, but actually for me it's associated too with these family events or these changes.
Would you do something about religion?
I think religion's a really hard one because tolerance of religion is about respecting other people's opinions, even if you think they're mad. I think there's a sort of provided they're not hurting anyone. And but it's a hard question. You look at the last 100 years, and the amount of people that Christians have killed is vast. Huge numbers of people. And you look at the toxic combination of violence and Christianity in America, on the right wing particularly. You just see how dangerous and violent and awful it is. But at its heart, there's something profound, isn't there, about religion, to do with spirituality, and about a belief that there's something else operating in the world, some other force. And I think that's a profoundly human impulse, whether it be primitive man worshipping thunder, or whether it be,
So you wouldn't do a song about the jihad?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, for me, it feels like, I just think that subject is too complex, and I don't feel like that it's properly represented, that the way that that's talked about. So, for example, there's a lot of horror at the beheadings that ISIS do, and yet Saudi Arabia beheads people every day, and Saudi Arabia is a huge recipient of money and arms from us, and Saudi Arabia gives us an awful lot of oil. And so there feels like a lot of hypocrisy in how that's talked about. And there's obviously great horror at beheadings of people
and that's incredibly wrong, and I would never defend violence in that respect whatsoever. But at the same time, you have Americans sending drones and shooting people from the sky without any sort of identification, by flying death robots, you know. How is that any better? You know, why is that better? Or how is that better? And just because we see that and don't see that doesn't make one or the other better. So for me, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of hypocrisy around how that stuff is represented. And I feel like I should, I need to start what's close to home, and what's close to home is my government, my government behaving badly, and that's the first thing that I need to address. You know.
So we found a topic that is too complex from what you have. I'm not proud, but surprised. Coming to the end, a totally different topic actually. Recently, music fans set up a crowdfunding campaign to raise money for the band The Winstons, or their ancestors, because they, as you obviously, I guess you know, produced one of the most sampled thing, which is called the almond break.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
But they never really got paid royalties for the use of thousands of jungle albums, etc. So, if they raise now money for this, would you donate?
Would I donate? No, I never used the break. So,
and if you used it,
if I had used it, I don't know. I mean, I think my first response is that yes, I should. I really think that it's not. For me, that's not really in question. For me, it's all about putting it in a wider context. You know, it's like, well, where does that? You know, is that the beginnings of a wider political movement where people start paying for samples that they used? You know, and that would be really exciting. I just get a little bit suspicious of. I don't know anything about this case, so I'm not a very good spokesperson for it.
I mean, you know that the almond break has constructed a whole musical genre.
Of course, yeah. But what I'm saying is, I didn't know until you told me about it. I didn't know this thing. And this sounds like a nice idea to me. It sounds like a good idea. It would just be nice to feel like that was part of a wider context of recognising. I think particularly black music. You know, I think there's a lot of sampling of rare and unusual black music, and a lot of those musicians never got paid properly in the first place. Whereas you look at something like the opera, nobody samples the opera, and yet we pay for it through our taxes. You know, so actually you probably got a legitimate right to sample bits of opera because you probably own sort of a small part of it. You know. But that's not what's sampled, you know. And so for me, there's it sounds like a great idea, but you just have to be careful that money is not seen as the solution to particular problems. Problems being institutional racism, institutional corruption, and how music is distributed, particularly in the past. So it sounds like a good thing. But and if I sampled the Amen break, I would consider paying something. Yeah.
I mean, to put the question in another way, is it like, would you support the open source sort of model, which people would claim, hey, no, I mean, of course we used the sample, we could construct our songs. If back then this band would have sold their sample, maybe something like drum and bass wouldn't exist today.
But I think there's a lot of people that make really unconvincing moral statements. I've heard over the years about sampling, about, hey, some guy said, I was in a debate once and one guy said, I feel I own ZZ Top's music more than they do because I've listened to it more times and I've dissected it and all this kind of stuff. And I think the real problem that we have with all of that is that people then go off and sell it. So people claim that it's some kind of moral right to be able to sample somebody else's work without their consent, but then they charge money for it and claim ownership for themselves. And for me, if they were just giving away the music and in the same spirit that they took it, then maybe it would be less morally grey. But I find it unconvincing as soon as people start to sell the music themselves, you know, and that's so often the case.